During World War II, coconut oil was used to make explosives. The Allies fought for Pacific Island plantations because of it. Today, that same oil is eaten by the spoonful and called a brain superfood. The oil never changed, only our relationship with it did.
Take a bottle of extra virgin olive oil with a beautiful label. Look at the price. There is a solid chance you just dressed your salad with a blend of soybean oil, chlorophyll, and beta-carotene. Italian prosecutors call it agromafia. The scheme works because we are not buying fat, we are buying a picture of Tuscany. Cheap pomace oil gets colored, a drop of the real thing added for smell, and poured into gorgeous bottles. Nearly half of all bottles labeled extra virgin in American stores fail laboratory testing.
But here is the real joke. For years, we were afraid to heat this oil. Low smoke point, destroyed vitamins, that was the story. In reality, fresh extra virgin has a smoke point of around 210 degrees Celsius, 410 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than most home cooking ever reaches. And its natural antioxidants hold structure better than many refined oils we consider safe for frying. The most expensive oil on the shelf, half of it is fake. The other half works better than we ever gave it credit for. But olive oil goes rancid. Months and it turns. If you need an oil that survives years in the heat, you press seeds. In Mesopotamia, more than 3,000 years ago, sesame oil was used to pay wages and buy grain. The Code of Hammurabi recorded its value in silver. It did not go rancid when everything else turned to sludge. That is why it became currency, not just an ingredient. But today, one name hides two completely different products. Light sesame oil, pressed from raw seeds, neutral, fine for cooking. Dark sesame oil, from toasted seeds, with a heavy roasted aroma. Its smoke point is around 170 degrees Celsius, 340 Fahrenheit. This is not a cooking oil. It is a condiment. You add it at the end, like salt. Pour it into a hot pan and the aroma dies in seconds, leaving only bitterness. We buy the dark bottles, crank up the heat, and then wonder why the food smells burnt. 3,000 years ago, it was hard currency. Today, we just mistake it for cooking fat. Moving further east.
You take regular butter, put it on low heat, and just wait. The water evaporates, the milk solids sink to the bottom. What remains is pure golden fat. Sounds like a kitchen trick. It is actually an ancient survival algorithm. Regular butter burns at around 150 degrees Celsius, 302 Fahrenheit. It is the milk protein that burns, leaving that familiar smell of scorched fat. Remove the protein and water, and the smoke point jumps to 250 degrees Celsius, 482 Fahrenheit. And it sits in a clay pot for up to a year without refrigeration. This was invented in India 3,000 years ago, not for haute cuisine, but because in 40-degree heat, without refrigeration, regular butter turned to waste in 2 days. Today it sits on shelves labeled superfood and sells for a premium. For ancient Indian cooks, it was simply the only way to keep fat from spoiling before dinner. Ghee was lucky. Its reputation survived. Another oil was not so fortunate. Until the early 20th century, lard was in every American kitchen. Frying, baking, braising, all of it. Lard gave pies that flaky, crisp crust that butter simply could not replicate. Then, Procter & Gamble invented a way to make solid white fat from vegetable oil. Cheaper than lard, longer shelf life. But nobody wanted to swap something familiar for something unknown. So they took a different approach, not promoting their new product, but attacking the old one. Lard was declared dirty, heavy, and old-fashioned. Millions of cookbooks were handed out for free, and every single recipe called for their product only. Within 2 decades, lard had vanished from American kitchens. Not because science proved it harmful, because one company rewrote what counted as normal. We still think it was a victory for health. In reality, It was one of the most successful marketing campaigns in the history of food. But while marketers were rewriting the rules for fat, the dairy industry was fighting over something else entirely: the color of your breakfast.
For thousands of years, butter was the only dairy fat on the table. Expensive, perishable, but familiar. In the late 19th century, a French chemist commissioned by Napoleon III invented a cheap substitute for the army and the poor, made from animal fat and milk. They called it margarine. Margarine cost half the price of butter. It looked almost identical. The dairy industry panicked. The response was simple and absurd. American states lobbied a law. Margarine had to be pink. Not yellow like butter, but pink. So no one would confuse it with the real thing. So shoppers would see pink fat and immediately lose their appetite. Some states went further and banned margarine outright. Wisconsin held its ban until 1967. The war was not about taste or health. It was about color. The pink laws were eventually repealed. Margarine went yellow again and stayed on the shelves forever. But while American dairy farmers were fighting over color, on the islands of the Pacific, another oil was preparing for a very different war. First, it went into explosives. Then, it became an icon of healthy living.
During World War II, coconut oil was needed by the military. Not for food, it was used to extract glycerin, the base for explosives. Coconut plantations across the Pacific Islands became strategic targets. Wars were fought over them. After the war, that same oil returned to kitchens. But in the 1950s, a scientist named Ansel Keys declared that the type of fat found most abundantly in coconut oil was dangerous for the heart. Coconut oil contains around 82% of those fats, more than butter or lard. It was cut from diets for 30 years. People were simply afraid to eat it. Then came the keto movement. Those same 82% suddenly became good for the brain. The oil started going into coffee, onto faces, and down throats by the tablespoon. The American Heart Association still considers it harmful for cardiovascular health and recommends limiting consumption. Fitness bloggers call it a superfood. The oil itself has not changed by a single gram. Only the trends do. But there is an oil that never had a marketing story at all. No wellness boom, no reputation war. Just a religious rule that accidentally built an entire industry.
In 19th century Russia, Lent was serious business. Animal fats, butter, lard, cream were strictly forbidden for several months a year. Sunflower oil did not make the list. Nobody thought to include it. Peasants figured it out quickly. Sunflowers were planted on an industrial scale. By the end of the 19th century, the Russian Empire was producing most of the world's sunflower oil. An ordinary religious loophole accidentally created a global industry. Today, sunflower oil is one of the most widespread on the planet. Neutral flavor, high smoke point, low cost. It goes into almost everything, from mayonnaise to chips to ready-made sauces. But there is one detail that rarely gets mentioned. It is extremely rich in omega-6 fatty acids. In small amounts, the body needs them, but many researchers link excess omega-6 to chronic inflammation. And the average person today gets far more than the body needs, mostly through oils like this one. A religious loophole accidentally built a massive industry, and that industry, in turn, created a problem we are only beginning to understand. But if sunflower oil went global almost by accident, the next one did it deliberately. It is in nearly every other product on the shelf, and most of us have no idea.
You never buy it, but you eat it every day. Palm oil is in nearly half of all products on store shelves. Chocolate, cookies, bread, ice cream, face creams, shampoo. Manufacturers do not write palm oil on the label. They write vegetable oil. The reason is straightforward and brutally efficient. One palm tree produces nearly 10 times more oil per hectare than soy or canola. It is cheaper than any competitor, and it melts at exactly human body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius, 98 Fahrenheit. That is why chocolate melts in your mouth and not in your hand. That is why face cream feels like it was made for your skin. Replace it, and farmers would need several times more land cleared for other crops. But growing those palms means cutting down tropical rainforests. Indonesia and Malaysia have already lost millions of hectares. Wild animals, orangutans among them, are losing their homes. And cardiologists recommend limiting consumption due to its high saturated fat content. The most efficient vegetable fat on the planet, the cheapest, disputed for health, and the primary defendant in the destruction of tropical rainforests. One tree, four contradictions.